both at work and beyond. The lecture will be presented by Dr. Mahmoud Natout. Mahmoud is an educator. Mahmoud is an educator, trainer, researcher, and grappler who is keen on integrating play in all his work. He has worked as a researcher, trainer, and consultant for various governmental and non-governmental organizations, including the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, Center for Educational Research and Development, Higher Council for Childhood, Ministry of Social Affairs, and UNICEF, among others. He is the co-founder of Lab, Play, which is dedicated to harnessing the power of play to unlock human potential for creativity and innovation in all stages of life. Mahmoud Natout holds a PhD in education and a master's in science and religion from the University of Oxford. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from LAU. Our very own alumnus, Dr. Mahmoud Natout, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for this very kind and encouraging introduction. And I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for coming. I see so many familiar faces in this room and a lot of beautiful smiles which are just warming up and lighting up the room. So thank you so much for coming. I'm very happy to be here and very excited to be talking to you about this topic tonight. What I'm going to do, since this room is kind of longitudinal, I'm just going to be walking back and forth. So bear with me. So I don't want to exclude anybody, so I'll just try to go back and forth between these two polarities. I'm going to be talking tonight about a topic that is very, very dear to me on both personal and professional levels, which is play. But I have to warn you, it's a very, very weird topic. And it's a very, very interesting concept to try to talk about, define, grapple with, and understand. And as we go through tonight's presentation and perhaps the discussion afterwards, you will find out, hopefully, if you don't know already, how hard it is to understand play. Although it is so easy to experience, it's very natural for us to experience play. We've all experienced it as adults and as children. But what I want to talk about is the transformational power of play for all human beings and not only children. But I'll get to that in a second. So, but before we do that, let's play. Are you ready to play a game? Yes. Oh, great. Okay. I don't know if you've played this game before. It's called The Wind Blows on All of Those. In Arabic, الريح بتهب. If you've played it, you usually stand in a circle. Somebody stands in the middle, and they say the wind blows on all of those, and they say something. If it applies to you, you run and try to find another place, and the person in the middle of the circle has to take your place. We're not going to do this in this hall today because it's very crowded. It will become chaotic and quite dangerous if we're running around and exchanging seats. What I'm going to ask you to do instead, when I say when the wind blows on all of those, and say something, if it applies to you, I just want you to do the wave. Is that okay? You can do it seated, you can do it sitting down. If you feel too excited about that, you can stand up and just do it, okay? Let's try it on something very simple. The wind blows on all of those who are wearing pants. Oh, wow, okay, great. Can we accompany this with a sound like, whoo? All right. So the wind blows on all of those who are LAU students, faculty, staff, or alumni. A lot of alumni and student body here. I would like, for those who are not from LAU, I would like to, if you can join me, LAU body, in welcoming them by a warm applause. All of those who are joining us from outside of LAU, thank you for joining us. The wind blows on all of those who are happy to be here tonight. Very encouraging. I'm less nervous now. The wind blows on all of those born November 10th. Any birthdays? Who's the closest? 24? 11? 11? I only have one lollipop that also makes music. And since she's a former student of mine, I'm biased. Happy birthday, everyone. The wind blows on all of those who are newlyweds. Congratulations. They're busy playing. Great. The wind blows on all of those who are teachers. The wind blows on all of those who are designers, artists, architects. The wind blows on all of those who are writers or poets, spoken word poets. The wind blows on all of those who are in the field of business, entrepreneurship, management. Okay. The wind blows on all those who are scientists, medical doctors, applied scientists, mathematicians. I used to be one, only a few nerds in the audience. The wind blows on all of those who are other than what I've said. Didn't get a chance to do the way. Thank you very much. Now, a more sensitive question. The wind blows on all of those who are happy in their careers. Are you honest? Are you being honest? Okay. The wind blows on all of those who believe that adults should be able to play more at work and in daily life. My job is done. Thank you very much for having me. Have a good night. That was the main message of my talk. Okay, I'll stay and hang on a little bit. Maybe we'll have more to talk about. Great. What I would like to do is share a few ideas and insights with you. I will be talking for maybe a couple of hours, and I'm kidding. No, I'm just going to be talking for a reasonable amount of time, sharing insights about play, but mostly by talking about what I have come to call my 4 play convictions. No pun intended, no subliminal messages intended. For those who didn't get it, good. Okay. My 4 play convictions about play, which I've developed based on my reading, research, my professional experience, and also mostly my personal experiences in play. And I'm going to share them with you first, and then we'll break them down. And perhaps by the end of tonight's talk and the discussion following that, maybe I can make a case for these convictions. I have to warn you also about something. The presentation is not going to be the most rigorous, the most exhaustive, as well as the most coherent. As I already warned you, play is a very, very, very delicate topic, a very complex one, although it's counterintuitive because it's very natural and we all experience it very easily. So what I did is I cherry-picked experiences, personal and professional, as well as ideas from the literature to share with you. And I tried to knit them sort of into a fabric, but it's not very coherent, and I thought I could leave the real meat and the real insights to the discussion afterwards, perhaps, where we can learn from each other about our experiences with play and perhaps explore implications for our daily lives and work. Okay. My four play convictions are the following. Conviction number 1, P for productivity. I have come to realize that play is not the opposite of work. Play is not the same as leisure all the time. Play is not a waste of time, and play can be very serious. My second conviction is L for lifelong learning. I truly believe that play is how we learn many things, and play is what enables learning to be a lifelong process, especially for human beings. And I'll come back to that later, especially for human beings. We talk a lot about lifelong learning. I think play is what characterizes us as human beings to be lifelong learners, more so than many other species, many other organisms or animals. My third conviction, A for all. as you all cheered, play, I believe, is not only for children. It's not an infantile or juvenile endeavor. It's also for adults, for everyone. Play is for everyone. And my fourth conviction is why. Young forever. Play is one of the distinguishing characteristics of the human species, making us forever young. Okay, the wind blows on all of those who believe they have baby faces. Well, throughout the discussion later, maybe I can make a case for everyone to believe that we all actually have baby faces. And I'll try to explain that later, which pours into this conviction. Okay. So these are my 4 play convictions, and I'm going to try to make a case for them throughout this evening. The wind blows on all of those who like sports. Great. Well, I would like to introduce you to a few athletes, basically a few Olympians from the wild. Qualifying for the Winter Olympics for the category of the luge is our friend the raven. Ravens, like crows, they have been observed in the wild to slide down slippery, snowy slopes on their backs, slide all the way down, and fly all the way back up again, and doing it again and again and again for fun. Also qualifying for the Winter Olympics for the category of ice skating, bison. They're like buffalo. What they love to do is find a frozen lake and ski or slide on all fours on this lake as they trumpet happily and gleefully and doing it again and again and again. They love ice skating. Also qualifying for the Winter Olympics for the category of snow fighting. Do we have that category in the Olympics? I wish we did. Wrestling, but not in the snow. Grizzly bears have been observed to snow fight, to roll up snowballs and fight with each other in the snow. Summer Olympics. We've all seen dolphins on television, on the internet, maybe live, and we know how much they like to do flips, backflips. They leap out of the water and dive back in and do backflips, somersaults, etc. They love to do that. They have fun. They do it in isolation as well as in groups. Hippos, also qualifying for that, as well as sumo wrestling. But in general, they like to actually flip, do backflips in the river, twirl around, and they have a lot of fun doing so. Now, I would like to ask you, what do you think all of these animals have in common? What are they doing? They are playing, absolutely. And happy about it, having fun doing so. Now, I'd like to actually close in on a specific scene from the wild. There's a very famous researcher of play by the name of Stuart Brown. He's also the founder of the National Institute for Play. And he's written a very interesting book, very inspiring book on play called Play. And in it, Stuart Brown tells a very interesting account of a German photographer who also has a husky farm in Canada near in the Hudson Bay area. He has a small peninsula that protrudes into the Hudson Bay, and on it he has a lot of huskies. And he's also a photographer, so he takes photos of wild animals around that area. One day, while he was photographing huskies, out of the blue, into the scene comes a big white polar bear that looked really hungry and very aggressive. And of course, being a photographer of the wild, he immediately identified the polar bear and knew that the polar bear was extremely hungry. And the polar bear approached one of his huskies. The husky was tethered, tied to a chain. And of course, immediately the photographer said, well, I'm going to be down one husky. The husky is going to be eaten by the polar bear, and that's it. And of course, any observer who knows anything about wild animals would say the husky, being faced by this threat, had one of two options. You all know of the fight or flight response, right? However, because it's chained, it only had one option, which is to try to fight and defend itself because it couldn't flee, couldn't run away. However, something extraordinary happened, and it's all documented by that photographer. What the husky decided to do, instead of fight or try to flee, is do the following. Well, first, let me ask you, the windows and all of those who have dogs. Woo! Just a few. You all know that if you have a dog, and when it wants to play, it sends out, and it's a husky, great. It sends out a play signal. We've all played with dogs, perhaps, or some of us have. What it does, it wags its tail, it maybe bends forwards, and wags its tail and does a few play signals. And that's exactly what the husky did. And when the husky did that, sent out a play signal, a play invitation, lo and behold, the polar bear accepted the invitation. And we're talking about a very hungry polar bear who was approaching the husky with a predatory gaze, with one thing on its mind, food. And something extraordinary happened. Now, before we delve into this picture, what do you notice in this picture? What are some of your observations? They're hugging.
Playing.
Playing.
Emotionally attached.
Two different huskies.
There's an emotional attachment.
More huskies.
Same color.
Same color.
More huskies.
More huskies?
Yeah, it's different.
There's black.
It's the same one, I think.
No.
Or maybe it's a different picture, because he took other photographs of other polar bears also coming onto the scene. But what else do you notice about their behavior? Stress? Trust? Friendly? Very good. Now, let's look at some of the details. What's the polar bear doing here? It's lying on its back. And what's the husky also doing when it's being hunted? It's exposing vulnerability. One of the biggest characteristics of play is the exposure of vulnerability to one another. And trust. Very good. Now, whenever I'm designing a PowerPoint presentation, I always ask myself, if I had to lose all of the slides, which slide I would keep of the presentation? I would keep this one. And I'm going to come back to it, because it is imbued with so much meaning and insight into play. Not just about animals, but human beings as well. You notice there's also the polar bear lying on its back. This is called self-handicapping. In play, sometimes we self-handicap. We surrender some of our power and domination to others, and we reciprocate that. So there's self-handicapping, there's exposure of vulnerability. There's kind of like an altered state between these two. There's trust, and there's role reversals. Sometimes the husky is playing the dominant, and sometimes the polar bear is playing the dominant. There's role reversals. Now, what I'd like you to think about is the following. These are two creatures, two animals, set in their ways by instinct, by nature, used to the idea of fight or flight, right? With a little play signal, done by the husky, a third possibility all of a sudden was on the table. The husky, through a simple play signal, forged a third path. Rather than be eaten or run away, a third space was created, which is a space of play. What otherwise could have been a battlefield to the death of the husky, of course, through play was turned into a playground. And this is one of the most beautiful things about play. And we'll get to that again and again throughout the talk. So what is play? It's very hard to define. Stuart Brown, the person I just mentioned, says something very interesting in his book. He says, defining play has always seemed to me like explaining a joke. What happens when you explain a joke? You ruin it. It loses its vitality, it loses its power, it loses its meaning. And he believes, although he's one of the people who has been researching play for almost three decades, the founder of the National Institute of Play, he tries to resist defining play because it's very hard and very elusive to define it. He also goes on to say, another reason I resist defining play is that at its most basic level, Play is a very primordial activity. It is pre-conscious and pre-verbal. It arises out of ancient biological structures that existed before our consciousness or our ability as humans to speak. In fact, play circuitry in mammals is believed to be more than 100 million years old. We have that power inside of us, that mechanism inside of us, and it's more than 100 million years old, and it's persisted until today. It must be valuable. It must be important. Well, we'll get to that. Well, that's what evolutionary biologists try to do through their science. If you don't want to believe it, we can challenge them. But let's take it for granted for now, because we observe in many animals, and many mammals especially, that play exists in their communities. So if we cannot define play exactly, and maybe during the discussion we can leave some room to sharing some definitions of play. I have many definitions of play that span many fields of study in many disciplines. And that's another problem with play. There's no one discipline that studies play. It's studied by different disciplines like biologists, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, and many others. But we'll leave that till later. Let's look at what play does, perhaps. And many scientists and researchers of play say the following. Play allows organisms who can play, because not all organisms can play, by the way. A lot of biologists believe that only warm-blooded animals are capable of playing. Mammals, particularly, are very good at playing, but not all animals can play. So, it allows organisms who can play to go beyond certain thresholds and to go beyond certain boundaries. Thresholds of fear, of anxiety, of pain, and to explore new possibilities and new alternatives. Think back of the pictures we saw of the husky and the polar bear. They went beyond certain thresholds of fear, especially on behalf of the husky, and beyond certain thresholds of anxiety, and explored a new possibility of interacting. I'll tell you a quick story from my personal experience with play and with how play can allow organisms, in this case human beings, to go beyond certain thresholds of pain and fear. I have a daughter called Layla. She's 4.5 now, and she doesn't like princesses. And I'm happy about that. Thank you very much. She doesn't like princesses. She loves superheroes, as I do too. So she changes superheroes like she changes socks. But recently, she likes Batman and Batgirl a lot. And sometimes when we're playing superheroes around the house, we're jumping on the couches, running around, fighting imaginary villains. And sometimes Layla, jumping around, falls down and hurts herself. And what I've noticed, and I ask all of you who work with children, when she's in character, when she is Batgirl, her threshold for pain is much higher than when she is in a normal character. Because Batgirl is a superhero who doesn't feel pain. Sometimes she just تطبش على الأرض, and she gets up and continues fighting the villains. Again, think of children, think of yourselves when you were children. When you are in character, when you're playing and immersed in play, you have the ability sometimes to go beyond your thresholds for pain, anxiety, and even fear, and try something new and explore new possibilities. Peter Gray, also a very famous psychologist of play, observed children diagnosed with ADHD. You're familiar with ADHD? Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder. Basically, to put it very crudely, children who can't sit still. He's noticed that when children diagnosed with ADHD are in play, are in character, they can sit still or stand still for a much longer period of time than when they are just being themselves. Again, another testimony to how play and being in character and play can help us sometimes go beyond possibilities and seek new alternatives and surpass our thresholds for pain, anxiety, as well as other things. If you have any questions, let's reserve those to the questions and answers and discussion afterwards, unless it's like an amazing question or a very, very sarcastic joke. I take those, I love them. But otherwise, let's just keep that till later. Lev Vygotsky, all of the educators here know a lot about Vygotsky, probably have dream about Vygotsky from time to time. He says that play is the means by which children learn many things, including self-control. In play, children rise above their normal capacities and build new ones. They put themselves in fearful situations such as dive off a cliff or climb a tree. They do things that are at the edge of the level of the fear they can tolerate. I know I'm talking about kids now, but we're going to talk a lot about adults, and I want you to think that everything that's being said here also applies to adults. That's one of my play convictions. So basically, what a gift play gives us. It's the gift of risk-taking. There's not a progressive school in Beirut that I've entered that doesn't have on its walls, all over the place, risk-taking as one of its values. We all know that. Unfortunately, I still believe that we are falling short of really fostering risk-taking in children. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we are over-policing the way they play, both at home, outside of the house, and at schools. We're so scared of them hurting themselves or taking risks. Although 21st century skills and values that are sprinkled in all of the progressive schools try to say that risk-taking is a value that we need to foster in our kids. Now, play is a fantastic vehicle for fostering risk-taking in both children and adults. And in order to argue for this, I'm just going to share an experiment with you. Rats. We're all familiar with rats. If you've ever had a rat at home, you know how smart rats are in getting to the food and in sneaking in and out without being caught. Rats are very smart beings. Psychologists like to work with rats because they're so smart. And let me tell you about the following experiment. During their development, rats go through a very important developmental milestone where they need to play. It's a certain juvenile stage where it's a natural need. It's a basic need for them to play. And then they grow out of this and become rats set in their ways. They become set in their instinct. They become fully animals, let's say. So during that stage, it's very important for the rats to play. And research has demonstrated that rats that are allowed to play during that stage develop much bigger brains than rats that are denied play during that stage. But that's not the experiment I want to share with you. What happened is they took two groups of rats. One group was denied play during that very important developmental milestone. They were deprived of play. Another group, they were allowed to play normally. And when they grew up into adulthood, these rats were put in separate cages. And what was put in every cage was a collar that was soaked in cat odor. And of course, rats instinctively are afraid of cats. And on the other side of the cage, the experimenters put food and put the rats in the cages. Of course, when the rats became hungry, they needed to get to search for food. What the experimenters observed was that most of the rats that were deprived of play during that critical stage, most of them did not venture out of hiding and died of starvation because they were afraid to be eaten by what they thought was a cat. And all of the rats that were allowed to grow normally and to play during that critical stage ventured out, took a risk, explored the environment, went beyond certain thresholds of fear and anxiety, and discovered, of course, at the expense of safety, that's what risk-taking is, but discovered new possibilities and got to the food and were able to survive. So according to these scientists, they would argue that play is a very important vehicle for risk-taking. It gives us this wonderful gift that allows us to explore new possibilities and to thrive where we didn't think we could thrive. Speaking of children and policing their play, have you ever heard of adventure playgrounds? Anyone? Okay. Look at these playgrounds. They look like junkyards. Very good. It started out in Denmark, the idea, and then proliferated over Europe, around Europe, the States, Scandinavia, Europe, the States, and Canada. Adventure playgrounds, also known as junk playgrounds, junkyard playgrounds, they're brilliant. Bomb site adventure playgrounds, that's because of their history. What happened is a Danish landscape architect. Any landscape architects in the house? We have one there, I know. Great. A landscape architect in the 40s, I think, noticed that all of the kids were happy playing everywhere else except in the playgrounds he was designing. Disappointed. And he wanted to discover why that was the case. And upon observing once a group of children playing in a construction site and doing beautiful things around that construction site, he decided to venture into a whole new design for playgrounds, coming up with the basic idea behind what today is known as the adventure playground. And in it, children can take risks, can build things, can push their capabilities and thresholds and discover new things. And he wanted the playground to be a place where children could create and shape and dream and imagine a reality beyond their own. So, what does play allow us to do and how does it work? Again, I told you I will not be able to give you an exhaustive definition or a set of insights into the function or the role of play. But I'd like to also share another basic important function for play. Maybe you're all familiar with the idea of use it or lose it that is characteristic of our brains. We all know that the more we use our brains, the more they grow, the better they grow, the more neural connections we develop in our brains. And the less we use them, there you go. We will lose them. So if we don't use our brains, we will lose them. It's what I'd like also to call, okay, so let me get back to play. Play actually has the capability to help our brains grow. How? And I like to say the following. It's stimulation through simulation. What play allows us to do is to simulate multiple realities in our minds beyond the physical reality around us. So even if we exist in a poor environment that's not rich with stimuli, if a child or any being is allowed to play, they can simulate different realities in their mind and therefore stimulate brain development beyond the constraints and the confines of the environment. So it's a way for the brain to stimulate itself in order to grow without being confined to the physical environment around it, even if it doesn't have enough stimuli around it. So play through simulation helps the brain continue to grow even when environmental stimuli are not present. Okay, so what is play? I know I feel like I'm circling around the word and never reaching it, which is okay. And if you have, as I said, we'll leave till the discussion part maybe a few insights more into explanations of what play is based on research as well as your experiences. So if we can define play strictly, let's think of other ways to speak about play. And a lot of theorists and researchers of play would rather speak about the properties of play rather than a definition, a universal definition of it. And upon looking at a lot of literature on play, I discovered that, and this is not exhaustive, of course, not rigorous enough, but I've discovered that the following properties kind of most researchers agree on that they think characterize what a play state involves. Let me read them and then break them down to you through different examples. So, properties of play. Play is apparently purposeless. It is done for its own sake. Or some researchers say it is autotelic, auto meaning self, and telos meaning purpose. Kind of like self-serving. Play is voluntary. It has inherent attraction, freedom from time, diminished consciousness of self, improvisational potential, and the desire to keep continuation desire. Let's look at these individually. Play is apparently purposeless. I wanted to put up a sandcastle up there because think of building a sandcastle. Who likes building sandcastles? Okay, I love building them with my daughter. But if you notice, sandcastles are so ephemeral. The first wave that comes along just washes them away. So, and we do it again. But the act of building a sandcastle is apparently purposeless. It's an act of play. It's done for its own pleasure. And I put up a sandbox over there to speak of the many designers, innovators, researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs who sometimes refer to their laboratory, to their design studio, to their companies as their own private sandboxes. They feel at the height of invention, of innovation, of discovery, that they were playing. They don't feel that what they were doing was for a specific purpose. They are so immersed in what they do, and they feel that they're innovating not for a specific purpose. In fact, you probably all know about the big companies like Google and others who have reserved a certain part of their week or day for their employees to go and tinker around. Yes, or to just tinker around with ideas without any apparent or specific purpose that pours back into the company's vision and mission and everything. And through that, if you all know, a lot of companies like Google, for example, innovated some of its best products that we have today through its employees just being allowed to go into their own sandbox and tinkering around and playing around with ideas without any apparent purpose. The other property of play is it has to be voluntary. Imagine forcing somebody to play. It doesn't happen. It doesn't work. Actually, my team and I work with a lot of organizations, with a lot of teams, and we use a lot of play-based techniques. We use play basically to help organizations become more creative, more innovative. We help with team building. We help with many other things. And one of the biggest challenges that we face when we're working with teams is the idea of having them come on a voluntary basis. It's a big challenge. We have to negotiate a lot with management because if they force their team to come and play with us, they can't play. Play has to remain voluntary. Think of schooling as well and children in class. Most children have to go to class, have to go to school, are forced by their parents or somebody else to go and sit in class. And that sometimes deadens their curiosity and their love for learning. So a lot of schools and educational systems that have tried to innovate play and integrate play into their curriculum, into their school system, have been able to foster and promote learning better because children will voluntarily immerse themselves in acts of play. Social. Well, let's keep it open for now, and then maybe we can look into the nuances after all. But again, it's very hard to bracket what play is and what play isn't. Very hard. We'll delve more into the nuances as we go through tonight's discussion. There's inherent attraction in play. You see this person following the carrot. Play has to be intrinsically motivated. It can't be extrinsically motivated. And here some people might say, well, that's not true. A lot of athletes, great athletes, they play wonderfully, even if they're driven by the rewards, the fame, etc. Some psychologists and some researchers of play would beg to differ. Peter Gray, the person I mentioned earlier, does not consider competitive sports as a form of play, although many other scientists do. For Peter Gray, if you're competing and if you're set by certain specific rules, if all of your behaviors are controlled in order to be the most effective and efficient, then it's not play anymore. So for all of us parents who are interested in getting their kids to play at school or after school, if we overstress, I think, competitive sports, they're good, but we might be denying our children several other dimensions of play that come, for example, with free play. It's very important to be able to be intrinsically motivated to play. Freedom from time. When we're sitting in a class or a presentation like this one, and we're feeling like, you know, I wish the time would go fast and we can finish. When you are in a state of play, when you're immersed in something you enjoy doing, you forget the time. And play can, of course, span not just playing, like in a sandbox. It could be with your loved one. It could be with friends, with parents, with family, with colleagues, at work. Any form of play that gets you immersed in what you're doing, you feel a sense of timelessness and a sense of flow. And you forget about the time. And in fact, a lot of psychologists believe that that's when the height of our innovation and creativity exists. When we are being clocked and when we're timing our work tends to become more mechanical. We might be quite efficient. I'm not saying we're not efficient on the clock sometimes, but we're only efficient with mechanical work. Like really the low brainer, not the high brainer. But to be innovative and creative, it's important for us to be immersed, to feel a sense of flow, and therefore the sense of timelessness that play brings with it is very important for these very high cognitive processes such as creativity. It allows higher level of concentration and reduces anxiety. Stuart Brown says, to feel the playful, out of time, in the zone, doing it for its own sake sensation that accompanies the feeling or the joyful playfulness. It's the greatest moment, I think. I think we've all gone through this. Has anyone not felt this state at any point in their life? Okay, great, fantastic. Just bring back that memory and try to think of how you're always in that state. Well, I think you should come up here and talk about this in Oslo, because I'd love to know how you can maintain it. It's very hard to maintain. The pressures of daily life are immense. But that's fantastic. Diminished consciousness of self. This is one of my favorite properties of play. And in fact, I keep it in mind both on professional and personal levels. When I'm interacting with others, when I'm playing with friends, family, with my daughter, or when I'm working on a professional level with teams using play. Diminished consciousness of self. Let me start with a little ant that feels very powerful. A lot of teams that we work with and a lot of individuals that we work with using play and play-based techniques have told us that they were able to develop, without noticing, higher levels of self-confidence. After playing several times together, they feel more confident about themselves. Although, again, the play we engage them in seems purposeless. We don't tell them, we're doing this technique right now, or this strategy, and it'll get you self-confident in this aspect of your work or life. It doesn't work that way. So a lot of them feel that they've developed their self-confidence. Why? Because when you're playing, imagine playing with a team. Sometimes you might be the leader, and sometimes not. Let's go back to this lovely picture that I told you, if I have to lose all of my PowerPoint slides, I'd rather retain this one. When you are in a group, and you don't feel very confident about yourself, but the rules of the game force everyone to switch roles, to wear different hats, to reciprocate different relationships, to expose vulnerabilities where the dominant alpha figures in that group sometimes expose themselves and make foolish and silly things out of themselves. When you also do self-handicapping, the powerful actually, they put aside their power and yield to the domination of others because of the rules of the game. It allows people to go back to what play allows, to go beyond certain thresholds of fear and anxiety and explore new possibilities. And because play allows a diminished consciousness of self, for both those who don't feel too confident and those who feel extremely confident while at play. It levels the ground sometimes and changes the rules of the game and allows people to discover and explore possibility. It also works in relationships. I really believe that healthy relationships, be it friendships or more intimate ones, if couples reveal more vulnerabilities. They self-handicap sometimes, of course, in a joyful and playful way. They allow themselves to be dominated, sometimes to dominate. Verbally, physically, emotionally, and allow that game to take place through a state of play. It's very healthy for relationships. Of course, if it's done in a forced way, it stops being playful, and it doesn't work any longer. At work, institutions, organizations that are highly bureaucratic and very hierarchical, when we invite organizations to play with us, the management and the different teams, and the strong, powerful managers who are very self-confident on the outside, they have to self-handicap, to expose vulnerabilities, to allow others to dominate them sometimes, and make fools out of themselves. It opens up room for so much exchange, openness, communication, collaboration, as well as creativity. Because out of all that, ideas start to come out. People are not so scared of making themselves, of exposing their ideas to others without being judged. So a diminished consciousness of self is a very important property of play. And we really capitalize on it in our work. And I also capitalize on it in my personal relationships. Those that are successful, those that have failed. I'll talk about that later. And of course, what stems from all what I've mentioned are the following. When you're playing, in play there's improvisation and potential. If the ground is leveled and the power struggles are shifted, and if different roles are being played, people have more flexibility and freedom and safety to improvise, to come up with new ideas, to try out new things, which allows them to explore new possibilities. And continuation design. We want to keep doing it. When we're happy playing, we want to keep doing it. I put up a picture of a boy playing in that puddle. Try to remember when we were kids and we're playing, let's say, outdoors. We're cold. We're probably drenched with water or sweat. We're disgusting looking. And we're hungry. And our parents call us, come up, come back home. It's time for your bath, for bed. We forget about hunger. We forget about everything. We just want to keep on playing. It's a desire to keep continuing playing. And it's one of the properties of play. So these are some of the properties of play. If you're an educator, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a parent, and you want to foster a playful space for somebody, please keep these properties in mind. Based on my reading of the literature, my research, and my personal and professional experiences, humble ones so far, I've discovered that these are prerequisites of play as well as properties of play. And if we want to foster play, we need to keep these in mind. And so, based on all this, I've noticed the following. Play allows us to try on different responses to situations that more rigid situations otherwise would not allow us to. Play allows us to discover our abilities. We all think we know who we are, but when we have a diminished sense of consciousness of self and we allow ourselves to explore new possibilities, we might surprise ourselves and discover new things. I love working with groups using play, because with play comes so much surprise. Every time my team and I leave, we say, it's so surprising today. Somebody we didn't expect to surprise us actually ends up surprising us. It's wonderful. It allows, it's a tool for learning and socialization. It's a catalyst that leads to innovation, and it's a catalyst for action. We are more prone of taking action, trying something out if we're playing, than if we're not. And play releases the creative force in every one of us and allows one to see and embrace possibility. Basically, play is natural, which makes it very powerful. What I believe play, one of the great things about play is...
Sorry, there's a cat here.
Oh,
She's playing.
she just wants to play. Is somebody phobic? Okay. Maybe it's just sending out a play signal. Just imagine you're a polar bear, and that's a very helpless husky, and just maybe you can do some rough and tumbling with it. Okay. Somebody going to the rescue? Okay, great. We have a cat over here.
He's playing too. He's playing too. He's
playing?
drawing.
Oh, you're drawing?
Yeah,
brilliant.
I'm listening to you. I'm playing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you. All right.
He's playing alone.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm happy. I feel from her.
Okay.
I have phobia.
Okay, let's just, if you can take it out, thank you so much, because for those who will be nervous, they will not be able to play, because if they're nervous, they will not feel a sense of timelessness.
I'm afraid. Do not touch it.
لا ما بيأثر طعمه
No, it's okay, don't apologize, I love it. I think this is wonderful. I'm sorry
Did
for
you
those who
bring
feel
it here
nervous,
intentionally?
but it's just an unexpected, wonderful.
Oh my God.
I wish I could get this kind of response from you if I were a big cuddly cat. I should start presenting my ideas like a James Bond villain with a cat in my hand. Play is all about. Thank you very much. Okay, and what's great about play is that it's natural. It's not artificial. You don't have to force it. And so many today, in fact, a lot of people would argue that play is the mode for the century. It is the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age of the 21st century. So many people are interested in play in the 21st century, in understanding it, and in seeing how it can be harnessed or leveraged to help develop society. That I'm just going to mention a few, if you're interested to follow these organizations. The National Institute for Play in the United States, one of the co-founders is Stuart Brown, the scientist I mentioned. Their motto is play plus science equals transformation. They're trying to see how play combined with science, science being social science, science, all forms of science, can transform society and the world. The Strong Museum for Play, there's now a play museum that's also affiliated with the National Institute for Play. And also there are journals for the study of play that are patroned by the Museum of Play. Several conferences today focus on play, one of which is Serious Play Conference. Focuses on gaming, but many other also things where play can seriously be applied for work and innovation and creativity. And there are many other entities. I will share with you my contacts at the end. If you are interested in any form of information, I'd be more than happy with that to share it with you. And I can also share the PowerPoints with you if you send me an email. The D School. Who's a designer here? Have you heard of the D School? The Design School at Stanford. The Design School at Stanford University, along with the National Institute of Play, have recognized the power of play in creativity, innovation, and design, that they have decided to pour their efforts together and design a course called From Play to Innovation. So students studying design at the D School at Stanford have to take a course called From Play to Innovation that uses play-based techniques to help designers become better designers. And they have a lot of free material, by the way, at the D School, the Design School at Stanford, if you're interested in also going and downloading that material on play and design and innovation. Okay. So we've tried to grapple with a definition of play. We looked at some of the properties of play that some scientists share and some researchers of play share. What I'd like to share with you right now are different forms of play. Because play manifests in many different forms. You said, is gaming and video games a form of play? Others might ask, well, I don't know, are stories a form of play? Is watching a movie a form of play? Is watching a game, actually, sports game, a form of play? So there are different forms of play, and some scientists have gone as far as to look at these forms and also taxonomize them, thinking that there are certain very basic forms of play, very important nevertheless, but very basic, and higher and higher and higher forms of play. So what I'm going to share with you are the general forms of play, while also referring to personal and professional examples. And I'd like you to think about examples as well for the questions and answers or the discussion part of this, so maybe we can share them with each other and enrich our understanding of play. And the way I'm going to present them is through a taxonomy, so through a hierarchy. We might challenge that, but some researchers believe that there are certain play forms that are more basic and necessary for higher forms of play. So if people are denied more basic forms of play, they might have a hard time reaching higher and higher forms of play later on throughout their development. So let's look at a few forms of play. Let's go back to play. The wind blows on all those who have or care for kids. You didn't say it too enthusiastically. Like, I hope they're sleeping right now when I go back home. I hope they're in bed. I hope my partner or spouse or whoever, the nanny, put them in bed. They're beautiful little angels slash demons. Thank you very much. Okay. One of the most basic forms of play, and that might strike you as weird. How is attunement play? Is attunement. It's being in tune with somebody else. Think of your newborn infant when they were. Anyone with a newborn infant? You have a new baby? Alf Mabruk. The first encounters we have with our baby is a form of play. And it's very important and crucial for their development. In fact, scientists have studied, mostly mothers, but of course it applies to fathers as well, mothers and infants in a state where they are locking eyes and exchanging play signals and play behaviors, such as smiling, babbling, tickling the tummy, and doing other things. If you have your eyes locked with an infant and you're doing these things, and you connect an EEG to the brain of the mother and the baby, and it's been done, you find out that their brains get in sync, especially the right hemisphere of the brain of the mother and the baby. They become synchronized, and it's a form of attunement. They become attuned to each other's needs. And of course, it's a very important adaptive mechanism, because babies are so helpless when they're born, they cannot express their needs. And therefore, it's very important for the caregiver to develop attunement in order to respond in the most optimal fashion to the baby's needs. And playing with your infant when they're born in these simple ways, while locking eyes, will help you develop attunement more, and therefore be more responsive to their needs. So what can you do? You can look into their eyes, smile, do silly gestures with your face. And it's very hard to do if you're changing diapers, by the way, because of the stench. You all know what I'm talking about, the smell of baby poo. By the way, use that time. A lot of times we think of diaper changing as something mechanical and we want to get over with. It's not quality time. A lot of psychologists now advise parents who have a lot of work to do, who don't have a lot of time to spend with their babies. We're all guilty of that. We'd like to spend more time with our children, but we can't. To use that time of diaper changing as a very significant time to play, to lock eyes, and to develop attunement with our babies. It's very important. So if you don't have any other time but to change diapers, use it to the max. Of course, not at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're like half asleep and changing diapers, but when you get the chance to do so. In fact, attunement as a form of play is important for couples. Newlyweds, not newlyweds. It's very important to try to reach attunement with our partners. And when we look into each other's eyes, high fives. That's when your partner becomes your best friend. Which is okay, which is good. High fives can work, but in general, if we're playing with our partners, different forms of play, verbal and other, and of course, we maintain eye contact, it's very important. We can reach better and higher levels of attunement, which is very important for our relationship. So play and attunement, even for relationships, different kinds, friendships and intimate relationships, is very important. So it works for PG as well as rated R play acts. It's a misspelling there. Rated R. Okay, so attunement is one of the most basic levels of play. And a lot of researchers of play believe that if children are denied to feel a sense of attunement, it's very hard for them to develop higher and higher forms of play. The wind blows on all of those who have been bungee jumping. Really? That many? Is it as fun as people think? It is? You've done it? Okay, that's great. Okay. I haven't tried it yet. I should. Jumping is a great thing. By the way, almost all mammals do it. They love to jump. Goats do it. Dolphins do it. Humans do it. Everybody does it. Bees do it. That's another song. So everybody does it, and it's wonderful. Some have speculated that maybe because it is defying gravity that we love to do it so much. Some have gone as far as to also philosophize that by saying, by defying gravity, and since gravity is the fabric of space and time, we feel like we're defying space and time. Back to the idea of timelessness. I don't know if that's a little bit far-fetched. But in general, movement play, jumping, running around, rolling around, diving, are so important on so many levels developmentally. Children love to do it. I have in the middle the cartoon of a child on a bouncy ball. In fact, I was reading an article by a psychologist of play, and in it, he describes how one student of some, a student at some school who could not sit still, who was, however, a very talented gymnast, could not sit still in reading comprehension classes and lessons. And when the teacher decided to get a bouncy ball and let that student sit on it as they read their lesson, they did wonderful. Try it at school and see what happens. No, don't try it. Think about it a little bit. But what that child did is through movement, they were able to develop higher levels of concentration. In fact, if we think about it biologically, the part of our brain, the cerebellum, which is responsible for movement, is connected to our amygdala, the part of our brain responsible for emotions and emotional intelligence, as well as it fires into our prefrontal cortex, the most advanced part of our brain responsible for attention, for problem solving, for creativity, and many other things. And when we engage in movement, different kinds of movement, we are activating all these parts of our brain. Who likes to walk and think? A lot of people. I walk and talk a lot. I know. I try to stand still. I can do it. And therefore, movement can activate different parts of our brain. And so movement play serves so many functions on so many different developmental levels. On a professional level, every time we work with a team and we feel that they're having a problem playing, they feel inhibited, we go back to more fundamental levels of play. Movement. If you want to get everybody to play any game, no matter how advanced, and they're resisting, start first with movement play. It will get them going. Get people to jump around, to play chase, to play catch, to play tag. And every time we start playing with a new team, and they feel inhibited, unsure, unsafe, amongst each other, as well as with us, we start with movement play. we play tag or a variation of tag. And in 10 minutes, we're all running around like kids again, and we all feel open, more safe, to be able to expose vulnerabilities, and to try out different actions, to go beyond certain thresholds. It's fantastic. It's magical. If I ask you right now to jump up and down, I won't do that, for a minute, and I ask you to do something a little bit more adventurous, I bet you that you would do. Because play, especially movement play, gets us going. Gets so many different parts of our brain activated and ready to explore new possibilities. In fact, I'd like just to draw your attention to a lot of researchers of play have tried to connect the metaphors we use for thinking with movement. We sometimes say, oh, you're doing mental acrobatics right now, right? Or we say, for example, I want to raise a question. I'm jumping into a conclusion. Dive into this idea. I gave this idea a spin. Our metaphors actually might capture something deeper than what we think. A lot of our metaphors about thinking come from movement. A lot of researchers would like to argue that there's a very close connection between movement and higher order thinking. And if play can help us move, therefore it can help us develop higher order thinking. Object play. Can you tell which one is the monkey? Kids, they're also monkeys. They're wonderful. Object play. We like to play with objects. In fact, I want to tell you a quick story. Sigmund Freud, I know a lot of them might hate Sigmund Freud and don't believe in his theories, but I'm one of his proponents. I like a lot of the things that Sigmund Freud has proposed. Once he was observing one of his grandchildren. You know, he had a lot of children and a lot of grandchildren. For a psychoanalyst, I don't understand that. Anyway, he had a lot of grandchildren, and once he was sitting and observing one of his grandchildren who was 18 months old, sitting in his crib and playing not with a yo-yo, but I couldn't find a picture of a wooden loop tied to a string. And what that kid was doing, yeah, you can do that with it, very good. That child, Freud observed, was throwing the loop out of the crib, out of sight, feeling a little bit nervous, and then pulling it back into its sight, its possession, and feeling relaxed. And then throwing it back out and doing it again and again and again. And Freud thought, why would that child inflict this nervous tension onto itself? If we're only governed by the pleasure principle, which is seek pleasure and avoid pain, why would a child submit itself to this repetitive anxiety and then release, anxiety and then release? And Freud said, well, perhaps this child playing with this object, having access to this object and being able to voluntarily, again, voluntarily, that's play, lose it and bring it back into existence, lose it and repossess it, regain it, is developing ego mastery. The ability to deal with loss and regain, loss and regain. The first object that a child loses is the mother, right? When the mother leaves the room and comes back, first the breast leaves and comes back, because that's the first object the child is attached to. The child starts to learn how to deal with anxiety and then release anxiety and release. When they grow older, they voluntarily choose to do so in order to develop ego mastery, to be able to deal with these deep-seated emotions of loss and the anxiety behind it, and then success and regain. And through that, the ego develops mastery over that and develops more and more nuanced abilities to deal with situations. Why did I tell you that story? Because I think this is highly tied to object play, when we play with objects. Tinkering with our hands. You're tinkering with your hands and you're drawing, which is amazing. When we tinker with our hands and play with objects, it helps us think. It helps us be more creative. It helps us be more innovative. Let me tell you a quick story about the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab that allowed NASA to send the robotic vehicle to Mars. You're familiar with that laboratory, JPL. In fact, one of the leading figures in it, who's originally Lebanese, came and gave a talk here a couple of years ago. Yes. He was the chairman of the board of LAU. Excellent. So, at JPL. JPL was facing a problem. They discovered that many of their young scientists, who are Ivy League graduates nevertheless, from Harvard, Princeton, Caltech, etc., were not as good problem solvers as the older folks at JPL, who were retiring one after the other. But they're still graduates from Ivy League universities, top universities, and they wondered what was wrong. So they looked into it, they researched it, and they found a certain variable that was common amongst all of those new scientists that they had. Most of them did not have, throughout their childhood, the opportunity to tinker with their hands, to take apart radios and try to fix them, to try to take apart their little cars and try to fix them, to work on automobiles with their own hands. And what they discovered is that there's a really close connection between our hands manipulating objects and our development of problem-solving skills. Even if the connection looks purposeless, if what we're doing, what we're tinkering with, is purposeless, which is the definition of play. So children playing with objects allows them to develop many skills on so many different levels. Stuart Brown says the brain is always in search for a hand, and the hand is always in search for the brain. They are deeply tied together and work alongside one another. And therefore, working with objects through play is very important. There's not a team that we work with that we don't ask to play with objects at some point and tinker around with objects, even if it looks purposeless. It allows them to open up, to think critically, to problem solve together, and to reach creative solutions together. Social play, a higher form of play also, beyond attunement, beyond movement play, object play, social play. Such things as rough and tumble, بس نرجع سوا مع أولادنا أو مع أصحابنا, very important. Again, when we also play chase and tag, forms of social play, ritual play, it enhances friendship and belonging and team building because it allows children, adults, everybody to experience role reversals, to reciprocate vulnerability again, and to give and take. It's a process of giving and taking. It allows, through play, children and adults to learn so many things, personal and social levels. It enhances altruism, cooperation, emotional regulation, and many other things. Okay, the wind blows on all of those. And I'm going to say it's a little bit of a sensitive topic, but since it applies to me, I'm going to go ahead and say it. If you don't feel like sharing it, that's okay. And by that, I'm trying to play by sharing a vulnerability. Okay? So the wind blows on all of those who are divorced. Ooh. Okay. I don't feel too alone. Okay. The wind blows on all those words. Okay, great. I want to share with you a story that might pave way to the highest forms of play that I want to share with you, the highest forms of the taxonomy. You recognize that figure, right? Mowgli from the Jungle Book. This was one of my daughter's favorite movies for a while. And she identified with Mowgli a lot. And right about that time was when my ex-wife and I were getting a divorce. And so we separated and we moved into 2 houses. And we tried to make it for Layla as smooth, comfortable as possible to come to terms with this great change. It's a huge change in her life. That was around a year ago, so she was around 3, almost 3.5. And she was watching this movie again and again and again, because children like to do things repeatedly. And she identified with the figure of Mowgli. And I've noticed at one point that Layla started to like to come more to my house rather than my ex's. And that wasn't good, of course, because we want to try to help her feel at home as much as possible in both houses. And then I picked up on something that Layla was playing with in her head. Every time she came to my house, she insisted that I played Baloo the bear, topless, because bears don't have shirts on. Glad that she only stopped at that. And she also took off all of her clothes, kept her underwear on to be Mowgli. Of course, took off her rubber band to look like him. And she tried always to repeat certain scenes where Mowgli is insisting on staying in the jungle and not be taken by Bagheera back to the man village. You can start to see the metaphors that are in that story. And at one point I picked up on that story, and I knew that Layla was trying to play in her imagination with a conflict that she was facing. And I said, well, let's do that. Let's play it. Remember the story of Freud and the loop and the throwing it out and pulling it back and the throw it out again and pulling. We sometimes need to do through play things repeatedly in order to master a certain skill or to come to terms with a certain emotion. Every time she came to my house, we played that game like 20 times. Bagheera trying to drag Layla to the man village and Baloo trying to keep her in the jungle. But what we did is try to dramatize it. Every time I tried to sneak in a detail here, a detail there, exaggerating a part of the story, exaggerating another part, and she was doing that as well. While we were doing that, we were exploring possibilities and alternatives. Story play or narrative play, which are very high forms of play, storytelling, narrative, and creative play, imaginative play. They allow us to do, instead of things outside in the concrete world, a lot of things inside our heads, through stories, through imagination. And I noticed that my daughter was trying to come to terms with a certain conflict inside of her by playing a certain narrative and again and looking for alternatives and possibilities. And while doing that, was trying to go beyond certain thresholds of anxiety that she had about this important change that was going on in her life. And by doing that, at the end, Layla on her own, after playing this game for like 1 billion times, I'm glad it was during summertime, because we were both topless. At one point she said, well, now I have 2 jungles, and I can go to both jungles. And I knew that through narrative play, Layla was able to reach a resolution in her head, come to terms with this change in her environment that she needed to adapt to through play. And play is very powerful in helping us do this. So narrative or storytelling has the capacity to produce a sense of timelessness, pleasure, an altered state of vicarious involvement. When you're reading a story, you're watching a movie, you get to identify with its characters and vicariously experience things. As Layla was experiencing a different narrative in her head by identifying with Mowgli. And also creative, transformative play is when we engage in fantasy play at any age. We bend the reality of our ordinary lives and in the process germinate new ideas and new ways to be, new ways of being. So in general, these are different forms of play. Let me conclude on a few quotes. I told you this is not going to be rigorous or exhaustive in any way, and there's a lot more to talk about if you have time to stay and open a discussion or questions and answers. But I'd love to open a discussion because we can all learn so much from each other about our experiences with play. I will end on a few quotes. Stuart Brown, to go back on to one of my foreplay convictions, play is not the opposite of work. In fact, Stuart Brown says play, the opposite of play is depression. And I believe him because he started his career as a psychiatrist working on serial killers and discovered that most of them were denied or deprived of play during their childhood. I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. George Bernard Shaw says, we don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing. And I believe that as well. The more we play, the younger we are. The more young we remain. The more Peter Panish we stay. And it's what characterizes human beings. By the way, humans, amongst all species, are the most able to play way into adulthood. It's a concept known as neoteny. I can go into that in our discussion if you'd like to know more about it. We, as the most neotenous of creatures, have the ability to be lifelong players, to be players for life.